biggest act of civil disobedience in Canadian history as measured by arrests. The number as of September 23rd was 1,073 individuals. Well, let's get started before it's too late. The Fairy Creek Watershed, or Adias, is a valley of old-growth trees situated on the traditional territories of the Pacheedaht people in the southwest of Vancouver Island. It is the last intact watershed outside of a provincial park or conservation area, although technically the Fairy Creek Watershed is a specific valley which measures about 1,200 hectares. It has been used as a catch-all term for the surrounding forests, which also cover the territories of the Dididat and Huyaat nations. By colonial terms, much of the region is considered Crown land, and within Canadian law, it's public and not privately owned. By purely economic terms, it's a 60,000 hectare area covered by Tree Farm License number 46, which was sold by the province to Teal Cedar Products Limited, or Teal Jones, who can harvest these so-called crown timber within a 25-year period. That's pretty disgusting, that the government truly views the forest not as beautiful, lush places of life, but as a tree farm. In order to fell trees on this land, Teal Jones must apply for cutting permits, which allow them to access smaller segments called cut blocks. Cut block 7265, which is tattooed across John Horgan's butt cheeks, includes Adias, or the Fairy Creek Watershed. It's this specific area the blockaders are protecting, but let's be clear, this is not just about protecting one segment of forest. The blockaders are calling for a moratorium on old-growth forestry. To complicate matters, all three First Nations bands have contracts with the province to receive a financial cut from logging in their wider area. But does having the support of a First Nations council mean that all Indigenous people in the communities have given consent? The answer is no. Elder Bill Jones of the Pacheedaht, a former logger himself and a residential school survivor, is an icon within the movement. He has spoken about the difference between band councils and hereditary chiefs, a recurrent theme in land defense and resource extraction conflicts. Let's check out Elder Bill in action on the VHS player.
These are the witnesses of your denial and the Crown's denial of our rights to be free in our own land with all our people. And that is a shame that you are serving a crown that has crushed so many millions and millions of people, as is witnessed up in Kamloops right now.
Elder Bill recognizes 18-year-old Victor Peter as the true hereditary chief of the Pacheedaht people. Unlike the elected chief, Jeff Jones of the PFN, Victor's title is passed down through the original culture of his people, and his authority predates colonial laws. The book 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act includes the following quotation: "The Indian Act has displaced or attempted to displace our inherent authority as leaders and has eroded traditions, culture, and belief systems." The author Bob Joseph states that the role of the chief is to administer the Indian Act, and in no meaningful way does this reflect their former self-government. Since early August of 2020, land defenders have blockaded access points into Fairy Creek. The blockade has been carried out by way of several semi-permanent encampments placed at strategic locations throughout the region. Other tactics include these tripods, human walls or blobs, rock and debris barricades, and techniques involving people chaining or locking themselves into structures several feet in the ground and even hundreds of feet up in the forest canopy. So how do we get to this point? Let's go back to July 7th, 2019. The government of British Columbia announced that a two-person panel had been appointed to lead an old-growth strategic review and provide a report. This comprehensive report is called A New Future for Old Forests, and it includes 14 recommendations to the government. On August 9th of 2020, a small group of land defenders calling themselves Rainforest Flying Squad, assisted remotely by a computer-savvy American activist named Joshua Wright, blockaded the development of a logging road. A message was sent to Pacheedaht elected chief Jeff Jones and Elder Bill Jones of settler activist intentions to block road-building operations into the unceded territory. The Pacheedaht First Nation asked the protesters to leave, citing their council's agreement with the logging company, while Elder Bill invited them to stay and has since become a leading figure in the movement. Bill's invitation and the work of other Indigenous land defenders alongside settlers and BIPOC activists really is a big part of the whole blockade's social impact. But even within this group there is division, mainly because Wright and his small frontline media team have been accused of gatekeeping the Fairy Creek Blockade Instagram page, which has 86,000 followers and is the biggest account associated with the movement. Independent posts by well-known Indigenous land defender Siam Hamilton raised concerns about perpetuating white savior narratives that are typical of privileged white environmentalists who have little to no experience with Indigenous people and customs, and have blind spots with regards to representing BIPOC at large. Siam stated that, "One day, I hope these folks recognize that environmentalism without the presence of indigenous sovereignty and land back will only ever replicate the same systems of violence that got us here in the first place." In the online response, we saw two strong voices emerge to speak from the coastal indigenous perspective, both of whom have direct kinship and familial ties to Elder Bill and ancestral responsibilities to the territory. These people are Katie George Jim, Bill's niece, and Aya Clappis, a Somali Nuchalnuf Indigi queer. More than just defending the trees, they are ambassadors of indigenous law and echo Siam's words on white supremacy. Katie George Jim expressed that in an environmental movement, issues of colonialism such as capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and anti-indigenous racism must be brought to the forefront so they can be eliminated. Aya added that these movements must center indigenous sovereignty because it's the only way we can move away from the resource extraction cycle. This resulted in some changed behavior that included sharing the account's password with folks from Camp Landback, an indigenous-run segment of the blockade, as well as making an effort to amplify voices and provide a more accommodating camp experience for indigenous youth and elders. Despite lingering concerns, we can at least say it's doing better than Shambhala. On September 11th, 2020, the BC government finally released the old growth report they'd been sitting on for 4 months. During this time, the NDP government announced a deferral of logging to 197,000 hectares of old growth in which they labeled at-risk ecosystems. Sounds like progress. One big issue with these 197,000 hectares is that they weren't all old growth. This comes from a scientific analysis by PhD holder Karen Price and her peers, who are co-authors of A Last Stand for Biodiversity. They found that a quarter was not classified as forested. Another quarter was forested, but not old growth. The other half of the area was low productivity forest. Only 3,800 hectares could be classified as productive old growth. That's 1% of the deferral they made. In short, the NDP lied. And John Horgan won his flash campaign in October 2020 that included a promise to protect old growth. Here is a direct quote from his platform. "Many of our old growth stands are worth more standing up than they ever could be cut down, especially if we take a holistic approach that acknowledges broader benefits for communities and the environment. We will act on all 14 recommendations. Also, have you seen my butt tattoo?" Fast forward 5 months to March 2021. A panel of environmental groups, including Ancient Rainforest Alliance and Sierra Club, gave Horgan failing grades on his report card. He failed to prioritize ecosystem diversity. He failed to provide funding for a First Nations forestry tradition, and he failed to take immediate action with at-risk forests, as evidenced by Fairy Creek, which is literally in his political writing. Now, for what is arguably the biggest moment in the timeline, March 2021. Teal Jones wins a court-ordered injunction which prohibits road blockades and other activities. To my surprise, Teal is working within the guidelines of the Forest Stewardship Plan. Yeah, that's right, people. Apparently, forest stewardship includes the clear-cutting of 900-year-old trees. Wow, that's a real different version than the Boy Scouts teach. In the appeal, Teal Jones uses the land defender's aptitude for social media as an unfair advantage and complains to the judge about how well-funded they are. Guys, if you think people on CERB donating $50 to a GoFundMe campaign is like paying protesters for their time, you're delusional. They also fail to mention the fact they own 3 other mills in America and tree farm licenses in other parts of BC, which amass to a multi-million-dollar business. I think you can afford your own social media employee. A few pieces of advice though. Don't hire Gen X, and remember to use the hashtags white-owned business, old growth logging, and kill the rainforest to make sure you trend in all the best ways. Also consider tagging Brazil's President Bolsonaro, who's doing exactly what you guys are doing, but in the Amazon. Teal Jones claimed in this injunction that the blockaders were committing tortuous acts, which by definition means actions intended to injure or harm another person. All footage shows that the only tortuous acts have been committed against land defenders, as evidenced by a hate crime involving racial slurs from a group of all-white male contractors against indigenous youth.
Maybe you should go home and collect your welfare check. You made the Wallbrand look like Hastings Street.
Just move on, man. Let's go.
No, you move the fuck on, you cocksucker. You move on. We're not. You get the message. You fucking move on.
Holy fuck.
In another instance, a logger violently assaulted a young land defender who was, get this, chained to a fence with only one arm at his disposal. After the attack, the RCMP did not investigate the logger's crime and instead investigated the land defender for his apparent assault charge. The second criteria for the injunction is irreparable harm and really shows what this is all about: money. Written in the injunction is the following, and I'm paraphrasing. If Teal is unable to log within the area, it may be forced to shut down its mills. Teal estimates that the end value of the products is approximately $20 million and that they stand to lose market share and to suffer damage to its reputation. Well, cry me a watershed, Teal Jones. Just ask yourself, who will truly suffer irreparable harm in this situation? It's quite obviously the trees and the entire ecosystem. Let's jump right into some proven facts about old growth. Number 1, biodiversity, which is the amount of different plants and animals in a given area, depends on having enough old-growth forests. Without these habitats, these life forms die and it sets off a chain reaction that is devastating for humanity. Such is the case with this endangered lichen. Oh, sorry, not that lichen. That's from the movie Underworld. I mean this lichen, specklebelly, which is so rare that even BC Timber Sales guidelines state a 200-meter buffer zone should exist around each tree upon which it is found. The lichen captures and releases water and moisture, which creates damp pockets of air that move across the entire province, watershed by watershed, preventing droughts and forest fires. Number 2, old growth can be labeled as natural infrastructure, and it plays a critical role in water storage and treatment, specifically delivering cost-effective and safe drinking water. Number 3, carbon storage. Carbon can be stored in trees and soil for centuries. Forests like Fairy Creek are carbon sinks, and they are considered a critical factor in curbing climate change. Vancouver Island was once covered in these spectacular forests, but now has an estimated 3% of old growth left. The first day of arrests came on May 18, 2021, at the Keikoos camp, with 5 land offenders taken into custody. In the 4 months that followed, the RCMP enacted an illegal media restriction zone. Canada Land reported on this 2 times in their podcast. I suggest you follow them immediately. The police, in an act of unabashed paternalism, ushered all media personnel anywhere from 150 feet to a kilometer away from any arrests and actions. As a response to this, on July 20th, 2021, a coalition of independent media outlets, including the Canadian Association of Journalists, the Narwhal, the Discourse, Indiginews, Ricochet, Canada's National Observer, and the Aboriginal People's Television Network, gunshots for the APTN right now, asked the court to modify the injunction and allow the media access. Justice Douglas Thompson agreed with the Media Coalition's position and confirmed that the RCMP failed to justify the need for having extensive exclusion zones. Listen to me because I said so isn't going to work for the police anymore. Sorry guys, you're going to have to take an L on this one. Forever. In history. You lose. This is a loss for you, RCMP. They beat you. You lost. Having won the court case, independent journalists were now able to document actions with a much keener eye. It was the video capturing a police medic deploying pepper spray into a crowd of non-violent, peaceful protesters that went viral. Several other videos have circulated, as well as photographs, particularly of Indigenous women being carried off by 3 or more officers at a time. So far, there have been over 90 official complaints from Fairy Creek land offenders to the RCMP Complaints Commission, which acts as an official watchdog. These complaints range from excessive force, property damage, theft, verbal harassment, sexual abuse, and physical assault. Katie George Jim, who I mentioned before as a Pachidat community leader, had her head smashed to the pavement by police during a peaceful demonstration, and her hair was pulled from her scalp. A Cree Métis Irish Two-Spirit land offender who goes by Auntie Scoden on Instagram was handcuffed on the ground face down and reported in her post that a cop had an erection while doing so. She asked if he was hard, and he responded, "Yeah, you like that?" Another person named Fox reports to having their nipple twisted, breasts grabbed, and pepper spray directly deployed from close proximity. Sage Jackson, an Indigenous New Chalmers land offender who goes by Sage Against the Machine, had her ribs dislocated by the RCMP while locked into a PVC pipe, or what is known as a sleeping dragon. RCMP Sergeant Chris Manceau was caught lying about why pepper spray was deployed. He claimed it was in reaction to protest violence, but the videos show no such thing. Large machinery has been operated extremely close to people lying down in the road, and chainsaws and jackhammers being utilized in ways that do not follow safety protocol. A big failing grade from Fire Marshal Bill, if I may say so myself. I can't document all of the instances here, so I'm going to share a few accounts to follow that have popped up in my research and that are widely recommended. Across these accounts is a unanimous cry. BIPOC folks, especially femme-presenting, trans, and Indigenous women, are targeted by police, and people of color are disproportionately represented in the arrest count. As arrests were piling upwards of 350 around July, Teal Jones applied to the courts once again, this time to upgrade the charges from civil to criminal offenses. Why would they do this? Well, it means the Crown would take on the cost of the prosecution and not Teal Jones. The lawyers in these cases are most definitely servants of Sauron. I wouldn't be surprised if they were a ring race, and beneath their suits, they were merely invisible spirits from the chasms of Mordor. In September, the RCMP called to the government for more funding and attempted to mask it as COVID-19 related expenses, when in reality, they needed it to fund the paramilitary operatives against land defenders at Fairy Creek. From an economic standpoint, I don't even think the People's Party of Canada can stand by that decision. On September 14th, Teal Jones and their lawyers gathered at the provincial courts of Isengard, seeking an extension of their injunction and claiming the protests posed a threat to employee and RCMP safety. In truth, the entire injunction hinges on one thing: their so-called right to harvest timber. If the laws changed around old growth, which they should, the government would not place companies like Teal Jones in this situation. People don't want Teal Jones to go out of business, they just want them to stop logging old growth. Rainforest Flying Squad spokesperson Kathleen Code stated that injunctions are usually meant to be a rare and temporary sort of remedy. Her team plans to challenge the application once more on the basis that Teal Jones and the RCMP have acted unlawfully, failed to follow aspects of the injunction, and have used excessive force. After the Liberal victory, Lead Now created a massive online campaign calling the Canadian government to work across party lines regarding climate change. Will this involve Fairy Creek? Micmac lawyer and broadcaster Pam Pomater recently pointed out that not a single party in the Canadian election had a land-back platform. And the Union of British Columbian Indian Chiefs stated that in an unnecessary and expensive election, Indigenous issues were sidelined. Before I cut to my works cited list, I'll be leaving on the screen a list of places you can donate to. If I've made errors, please email me at rupert.common@gmail.com or message my News with Rupert Instagram account, and I'll do my best to set them straight.
Once upon a time I was sleeping on the floor, wasn't long ago. These days I've been on the road. This is all that I know, visions unfold. My past so vicious, I wish this I know. When ambitions are growing, you reap what you sow. And I'm deep in this work that I'm doing. I got the blessings, I got it all, yeah. I still been stressing, I got anxieties, I felt depression. Sometimes it's hard to be present, sometimes I'm hard on myself. And I feel this was all brought on myself. Then I break out of myself. I've been to hell and back, shout out to hell and back. Police and media vilify me.